All right, let's see if we can talk to Nick in Tennessee real fast. Atoa, stay on the line. Nick, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay. So, Atoa, just so you know, there may be an issue with your connection on your end. Please do try and call back. Nick, you would like to talk a little bit about steelmanning some religious arguments, especially around things like like a Tri-Omni God?
Yeah, I think that sums it up well.
Okay, cool.
The gist of it.
Walk me through what the goal is here.
So frequently I've thought that the approach that atheist debaters have taken when talking with theists is to go to, well, why do you believe that? Mm-hmm. And get into the skepticism and stuff. And there's certainly a place for that, but eventually we have to realize that they might just have reasons that are very personal and ingrained to them that we won't be able to shake. And so I think there's still an opportunity there for us to try and help them improve the beliefs that they insist on clinging to make those beliefs less harmful or less impactful in negative ways.
I can see the value in that, and that is honestly probably a much more effective way to talk through these conversations with people you actually know and care about. It's always good fun to be on the internet and be like, well, you're wrong because this fallacy, right? But when it's somebody you actually care about keeping a relationship with, there are going to be additional steps in there. Hopefully that will help ease that conversation and make it a little more productive. That said, there is a guideline that is given out by therapists who deal specifically in deprogramming people who are currently in cults. And the only thing I want to raise here is that, unfortunately, a lot of people with strong fundamentalist religious beliefs, the kind that would actually be harmful and would need that kind of mitigation, are in a very particularly programmed mindset. And even the smallest questions, even the smallest pushes can, in fact, have a rebound effect and double them down instead of make them think more. So you definitely know the relationships between you and your individual family members and how productive those conversations will be. Unfortunately, it's not always going to result in a reasonable conversation because even the smallest push in that direction can be kind of the immune response of the programming kicks into gear and they go on all-out attack at the slightest thing. So I'm sure you've had experience with that as well.
Yeah. Yes, some recently talking about hell and what exactly it would mean and the implications of it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not saying that this is any kind of silver bullet or magic answer that'll solve all the problems. But when we're having a conversation and why do you believe that becomes useless in the dialogue, then well, okay, like are there aspects of your beliefs that can be improved, or at least aspects of your argument, like. Because I think if we are trying to show people the value of a skeptical approach, and we're only doing it as like to better our own stance or our opposition against them, then it may seem a bit more confrontational, as opposed to, well, let's like working on the conclusion that, say, God is loving, for example. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense that he would create a place of torture? And trying to use their beliefs to better using their best beliefs to better their worst beliefs.
Yeah.
And try and come to conclusions and common ground.
And honestly, that...
'cause, like, beliefs can change.
They can. They absolutely can. And honestly, that process is what got me from fundamentalist to progressive Christian to... not sure what I was, but no longer a Christian, into the skeptical atheist kind of realm I'm in now.
Yeah, same.
I feel like though that was not an externalized process for me. So for me, if somebody else had been instigating that in a directed way, I think I probably would have clammed up a lot more. It really does have to either be part of an environment that you're in. Like, to me, the thing that would be even more helpful is to get them in an environment where that kind of thinking is not normalized. And it's not directed specifically at them, but, interdenominational church or, activities with people they care about that are not related to religion at all. Those things can actually help open them up more in their own time in a way that's more effective than sitting down and being like, okay, we're going to dissect this belief now. That said, I love doing that myself. Like, that would be a field day for me. So again, it really does depend on the individual. Is there a particular belief or argument that you've come up against recently that you'd like to kind of steelman on the call?
Yes, actually. There's one, I think Zeno brought it up a couple weeks ago, where he was going off about, like, if we look at the universe like a code and a coder or a programmer and how they would kind of interact with their code. And I don't think he explained the idea clearly or succinctly. But I do think that using the analogy of a computer programmer to the, like, let's say a computer programmer makes an artificially intelligent character or set of characters in a fictional world. Mm-hmm. Those characters wouldn't necessarily have any ability to perceive the creator regardless of that creator's realness, because he exists in some kind of dimension that is above, higher, before, or otherwise encompasses theirs in a way that they just, like, are limited and unable to perceive.
True.
So, like, the idea isn't inherently just, like, ridiculous. And so I think that there's a good argument to be made for ideas like simulation theory or the multiverse or just various things that, granted, don't have evidence or proof or anything scientifically usable at this time, but I think they could be valuable hypotheses for guiding conversations and inspiring ideas moving forward.
Oh yeah, no, I fully agree. I think that the reasonableness of looking at an artificially created character in a video game with some form of, like, intelligence and self-awareness, not being aware of the fact that they're in a video game, right, or that they have a creator outside of that dimension, makes perfect sense to us from outside in that other dimension as the creators of that external thing, right? We can absolutely look at that scenario and be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That then opens us up to this possibility of, that kind of infinite regress of, like, okay, well, if we've done it, then maybe someone else did it for us. And how do we know that someone else didn't do it for them? And the infinite regress part, I'm actually not concerned about. Like, eventually we are all going to get to an infinite regress, whatever we, believe. The problem I have is that at that point, it just becomes speculation. It's a possibility in certain conditions, and we are within that condition. But in order to make it anything more than a possibility in the same realm as every other proposed beginning of the universe, we would have to assume that the conditions were the same all the way up, right? Turtles all the way down would have to be, like, the conditions would have to continue to be the same, the way physics works, the way coding works, the way time works.
I'm not sure that's the case.
How so?
Going back to the analogy of, like, if I make a Sims game, I can adjust the rate of the passage of time in that game. But my time is a consistent thing, at least from my perspective. Like you said, I could be in some other simulation, but there's, like, as best I'm aware, my time continues steadily, and the creation's time can be adjusted. The matter can be, seemingly added to by just putting a few lines of code that causes a thing to be where there wasn't one before. But did that thing come out of thin air? No, it came out of my computer, out of the machine, the system that I'm using. But to the characters that are there, it seems like it came out of thin air.
Right. No, I agree. My point is, we have a very specific set of conditions that makes creating such a world possible. And so in order to create such a world, we would need the conditions that we currently have. And so if we are going to suppose that that creative ability could happen in our world from a world bigger or different than ours, we would have to assume that the conditions within our world would be the conditions in that one, in that there's somebody who is intelligent enough to create something. The ability to code or to create in a world is even feasible. So there is more assumed than just, well, it could be somebody else programming us. And that's the only problem I have with it, which isn't even really a problem. It's just, if you're going to make this as an actual hypothesis, we can't just rely on what we observe in this universe. If the argument is that this universe could be something that could change and wasn't actually the same as the universe outside of it. I don't know if I'm coming across in an effective way right now, but
yeah, I think I get the gist.
Yeah, it's just there's more at stake. In the same way that if you say, well, God created the universe, right? That answers the initial problem to an extent, right? It's like, okay, well, you have a cause in your brain, but that's just the first part of the question, right? The next part is, okay, well, what qualities of a universe outside of this would have to exist in order to support such a God? And where did that God come from? And would those explanations affect whatever created that God? So it balloons out in terms of the assumptions that are baked into the claim. I'm not saying that simulation theory is better or worse than any other theory, but I am saying that it still falls in the same category as assumption that you're making that has some explanatory power, sure, more than others, but doesn't rise to the level of a proof for any kind of external force.
No, and I wouldn't expect it to be any kind of proof at all. It's more an explanation for the supposed events that we'd seen, and an alteration of the idea of what God would be to make it one that's less of a paradox, I guess. Because I'm sure we've heard the traditional all powerful, all knowing, all everywhere God, and then we're like, well,
right,
how could he exist before time? And he's this thing that has so many grandiose powers that he's a paradox. He's impossible because can he make a burrito too hot for him to eat?
Exactly,
that kind of thing. But if we're looking at him as okay, he's somebody who has the whatever his set of abilities and traits are for creating a world, creating things in the world, altering the traits of people that are in that world, etc. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is exists everywhere, is paying attention continuously to what we're doing. The idea of somebody getting bored with a new game and just kind of leaving it after a few months seems like a good analogy for the old gods kind of fucking off and leaving us to do our own thing. And I'm not just trying to make excuses for the possibility of a God, but when we're dealing with people who are thinking of God in the terms of the prime first mover kind of big grandiose thing, it's not necessarily. He could have just been the guy who made our universe and has limited powers beyond that. And he'd still be able to fulfill all the God requirements that you're thinking of, but he wouldn't also have the baggage of trying to be this other stuff that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so kind of the point is to whittle the nebulous, grandiose concept of God down to something that's more relatable and usable, so that at least the dialogue can happen more easily and whatnot.
Yeah, and I do think that
sense?
it's a useful approach. I just think that it also, I don't know. I feel like it's useful in certain contexts with certain people, and it can be very fun for people who really want to kind of dive into all of that with you. I have some theist friends who I love doing that with and who get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and I am seeing some progress in those areas as well. The only concern is that would have to be a joint process, right? Both people would have to want to have that conversation for it to be anything useful. So yes, definitely an option. Definitely something that's fun to do. But yeah, not a failsafe, as with everything.
Yeah, I figured that was just kind of the general assumption for any dialogue we'd be having on topics like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
But all right, I'll let you go and get to other callers.
Thanks, Nick. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for taking me.